I'm Jason Sipe, and this is the Indiana Libertarian Update for the week of February 20th, 2017. Have you heard about what's happening to private property rights in Charlestown, Indiana? It seems that the mayor and his cronies have put together a scheme to get property owners off their land cheap and easy. We've got details on this government racket right in our own backyards. We've got that in just a few moments, but first, let's check on libertarian news and events from around the state of Indiana. We're going to jump right down to Charlestown. If you haven't done so and you'd like to learn more about Charlestown, I have their website up here, their Facebook page. Be sure to check out their Facebook page. But if it pleases the Crown, Indiana is one step closer to allowing its citizens to braid hair for money without a license. A measure sponsored by Republican Representative Tim Wesco of Osceola was passed Monday in the Indiana House on an 82-11 vote. Now goes to the Senate for consideration. Let's hope for the best for Indiana entrepreneurs with that piece of legislation. Just a reminder, it's illegal for anyone under 14 years of age to curse in Indianapolis. Well, the code is obviously not enforced. It's one of many arcane laws that can be found throughout the Hoosier State. It is Monday, so the Libertarian Party of Marion County will be hosting their February business meeting. It kicks off at 7 p.m. today at the Antelope. Of course, this is the first business meeting under the leadership of Brett Bittner. So if you're a Never Bittner supporter, you need to get down there and try to make your feelings heard. Again, that starts at 7 p.m., but people usually get there a little earlier for drinks at the Antelope Club in Indianapolis. Now, if you have any interest in economics, you'll want to check out this event. It's sponsored by America's Future Foundation. Learn about Ball State's Schneider Institute with Steve Horowitz. That's going to be happening Tuesday, February 28th. It happens at Liberty Street and it kicks off at 6:30 p.m. You do want to get tickets for this, and it is worthwhile because the good folks at America's Future Foundation, not only do they give you really good programming, they usually give you a beer or whatever drink of your choice and some pretty decent snacks for these events here in Indianapolis. Be sure to check that out. Now, down in the southern part of the state, those folks in Bartholomew County can go to Powerhouse Brewing for Liberty Brews. That's going to be March 3rd. It's a casual get-together. It's not a business meeting. It is just a casual get-together for the libertarians in that part of the state, or from any part of the state for that matter, if you want to get down there. From 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., that's on Friday of next week, March 3rd. And again, that's at Powerhouse Brewing Company down in Columbus, Indiana. The folks over at the First Church of Cannabis, not only do they have their 7 p.m. Services every Wednesday, on March 6th, they'll be doing a film festival, kicking it off with a classic Reefer Madness, and that's going to be at the First Church of Cannabis here in Indianapolis. On March 6th, it kicks off at 8 p.m. If you haven't had a chance to visit there with Bill Levin and all of his friends, be sure to do so. The Higher Fellowship is going to be having their Boone County legalization rally on the steps of the Boone County Courthouse on March 11th. If I'm not mistaken, this is the one that they had to go to court over to make happen. But again, that happens Saturday, March 11th from noon to 3 p.m. for those of you folks in Boone County who want to show your support to re-legalize cannabis in the state of Indiana. Another opportunity for you cannabis legalization supporters. The Higher Fellowship will be hosting Indiana's medicinal cannabis legalization town hall meeting. The second one, this happens on March 16th. The last one was very well attended, and it looks like there's a very real possibility that we're going to see some form of legal cannabis for medicinal purposes in the state of Indiana as a result of this legislative session. Is it going to be the right one, though? Is it going to be one that's going to actually have an impact and help save lives? Or is it going to be a stopgap measure that will possibly postpone getting real help and real medicine? Get down to the town hall meeting to learn more about those legalization efforts. For those of you folks up in the northern part of the state, the Libertarian Party of Lake County will have their annual convention and officer elections on March 16th. That's Thursday, March 16th, at Houlihan's in Cherville. Kicks off at 7 p.m. And don't forget, that's not Eastern Time. That's Central Daylight Time. Again, that's on Thursday, March 16th, 7 p.m. at Houlihan's Steakhouse for all you folks up in Lake County. That is just a little bit before the Libertarian Party State Convention, which kicks off May 5th down in Evansville, Indiana. That's going to be happening at the Tropicana Executive Conference Center. As if the government hasn't taken enough of your money, there will be a casino there to take even more. So be sure to go to the LPIN State Convention in Evansville May 5th of this year. Okay. Now, last week we learned that the Institute for Justice has at least 2 cases working in the state of Indiana. They are fighting civil asset forfeiture Fraud here in Indianapolis. IMPD and the Marion County Prosecutor's Office currently illegally use seized funds that are required by the state constitution to go to the general school fund. Well, they're taking those monies for themselves. We'll bring more info on that issue soon. We also learned about a bizarre and troubling scheme by elected officials in Charlestown, Indiana, to force those private property owners to sell to developers. We contacted the Institute for Justice, who was kind enough to connect us with an attorney involved on that Charlestown case. Here's Jeffrey Redfern from the Institute of Justice to fill us in with more details on exactly what's going on with civil asset forfeiture here in Indiana. Coming to this week's edition of Indiana Libertarian Update, we are very honored to be joined today by Mr. Jeffrey Redfern. He's here to tell us today about a very troubling situation in the southern part of our state. He works for the Institute for Justice, which is a legal advocacy group out of Virginia, I believe. But we're going to turn to Jeffrey for the details here in just a second. Jeffrey, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization, the Institute for Justice.
Sure. So I'm an attorney with the Institute for Justice. We're a national libertarian law firm. We're headquartered in Virginia, but we have several state offices, and we litigate all over the country. We primarily litigate in 4 areas. We litigate in property rights, school choice, economic liberty, and free speech. Obviously, there are a lot of other libertarian areas that need litigation, but these are sort of our specialties, and there's some other organizations out there that focus in other areas, but these are areas that we've really kind of pioneered. In particular, the property rights issues, like what's going on in Charlestown.
Yeah, some of us are familiar with your actions in the Kalo case a few years back, and if you read Reason magazine, you have had the back cover or thereabouts for the last 10 years or so, I believe. So a lot of us are just learning about the situation down in Carroll County on the banks of the Ohio here in Indiana. Can you bring our viewers up to speed on what's happening down in the southern part of the state with property rights?
Sure. In order for this story to make sense, I'm actually going to have to back up a little bit to the Kelo decision that you were talking about earlier. I think most of your viewers are probably going to be familiar with it, but the gist of it was that the Supreme Court said that it's fine to use eminent domain for purposes of mere economic development. Nothing wrong with the property we're trying to take. It's not going to be used for schools or roads or government buildings. It's just that we think that another private property will do something that might generate more tax revenue. There's a nationwide backlash against that ruling. In Indiana, like many states, passed some reforms to limit those kinds of abusive takings. Unlike a lot of states, however, Indiana's reform had real teeth. Specifically, it said that if you want to take private property and give it to another private entity, the particular parcel that you're going to take has to be essentially unfit for human habitation. So what Indiana did was they outlawed this sort of area-wide blight designation, where cities would come in and say, there's a problem with this neighborhood, we're going to level the whole thing, regardless of whether there are good properties there. So essentially, that brings us to Charlestown. Charlestown has this neighborhood in it called Pleasant Ridge. It's been there since World War II. It's a lower income neighborhood mostly. The houses there are they're prefab houses. They're not mobile homes. They were built to be permanent. They have foundations and everything. But some of them have deteriorated over the years. Now, there's a new bridge across the Ohio. You probably know more about that than I do, being from the area. But local government officials had the idea that this is really going to spur a lot of growth in their area. So they figured, well, why not get rid of this neighborhood and put in more upscale housing, and we'll get, more middle-class professionals living here, and it could be some sort of a fancy bedroom community. But of course, the problem is that Indiana does not allow neighborhood-wide eminent domain. So the mayor and the city council came up with a scheme to get around this eminent domain reform. What they're using is code enforcement. Now, pretty much every city has some kind of a property maintenance code. Bedrooms have to have egress windows. Foundations can't be sagging, things like that. Usually they're enforced with a complaint-based system. So if someone says, hey, there's something wrong here, whether it's a renter or a neighbor, then someone might come out, take a look, and tell the owner, hey, you have to fix this or we're going to fine you. And what's happening in Charlestown, however, is the mayor has directed the building inspector to go out in this neighborhood and issue as many fines as possible against these property owners. So they started this scheme off targeting mostly rental owners, particularly people who owned multiple rental properties. And in a very short period of time, they were able to rack up massive, massive fines. We're talking tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars for individual owners. And they say that these fines accrue every single day. So, you know, they could cite you for a torn screen, some garbage in the yard, chip paint, and those could be $50 or $100 a day. So you could have $500 a day total racking up every single day. By the time you even get the citation in the mail, you know, you could be $10,000 in the hole. Then they told these property owners, however, that, well, you won't actually have to pay these fines if you sell to this private developer who wants to level the houses and put up an upscale subdivision here. The private developer has only paid $10,000. That's all he was offering for these houses. So these people lost a lot of value. They're not extremely valuable houses, but they were, you know, in the $75,000 range before this whole thing started, and they still have tax assessed values that are around $30,000. Their tax assessed values dropped a lot once the mayor announced his scheme because nobody wanted to buy here if they thought their houses were going to get torn down.
This sounds as much like a criminal racket as a simple case of civil asset forfeiture abuse,
Well,
or eminent domain abuse.
I mean, I don't want to accuse anyone of a crime here, but it doesn't sound far off from some extortion schemes that have been prosecuted in the past. Typically, with extortion, the person doing the extorting, the public official, is getting some sort of a private benefit that's secret. But things like this have been prosecuted before. That's not our goal here. We're focused here on representing the property owners who have not yet sold, and who want to stay and live in their homes.
Okay. Now, how did this first come on your radar at the Institute for Justice?
Actually, this came to us from one of the homeowners back in 2014 when this scheme was first announced. Not the scheme to use fines, but the scheme to redevelop the neighborhood. The specific means had not yet been crystallized at that point. So one of these residents was doing some research and came across the Institute for Justice and got in touch with us. So the project started actually as an activism project. We have Institute for Justice is primarily a litigation firm, but we have other what we call businesses, including activism, strategic research, things like that. So our activism leaders went out there and helped organize people and essentially generated a lot of outrage and got this plan voted down. Unfortunately, it didn't stay down, and there was another election, and some new people got in to the city council who had different opinions about the future of these homes, and now we're back here, and this has become litigation. But we've been in contact. We've been in contact with the homeowners pretty consistently since 2014.
So is the city continuing with their actions at this point in time as far as the racking up of fines and pursuing additional code violations for the homeowners in this neighborhood?
Well, the city is continuing to do inspections. We don't know about fines because, well, at least as far as we know, none of our clients have gotten fines. They should be telling us immediately if they do, because then we would appeal them. But we don't individually represent every single homeowner. We have a reasonably large number signed up as individual clients, but the primary vehicle that we're using to represent the entire neighborhood is the Pleasant Ridge Homeowners Association. So there are a lot of members of that. We represent the association, and by extension, they're members. But then there are other smaller landlords who are not yet members. we're trying to stop the entire scheme, but we don't know for sure everything that's going on here.
Right on. So what is the status of the case? How is it being fought in the courts?
Well, we filed an amended complaint just, I guess it's 2 weeks ago now. And the most recent thing that we've done is we filed for a preliminary injunction asking the court to stop these inspections while the case works its way through the system. The real issue there is that if they go out, the city goes out and starts finding these people and inspecting them, they might feel compelled to sell before we are able to finish this. And once you've sold, you can't necessarily easily get your house back. So this isn't something that could easily be fixed after the fact. So we want to at least maintain the status quo while the court rules on the ultimate legality of what's going on here.
Could you let us know maybe fill us in on what the best case and worst case scenarios would be moving forward from this point?
I mean, long-term best case and worst case, or
short-term, long-term. I mean, for us here and other parts of the state, we are really curious just to know what's happening. So I guess maybe the short-term.
Okay. Well, so short-term, we're hoping that the city will stop all of this enforcement activity, which is illegal, and then people will know that they have security at least while this lawsuit's going on, and they won't be riddled with anxiety, because a lot of these people are. It's quite terrifying when you're on a fixed income and you live in a community you've been in for decades, and it's the only place you can afford, thinking, where am I going to go if I lose this house? So if people know that they're at least going to be safe while the court deals with this, that's the immediate objective. Worst case short term is that the city doubles down and gets very aggressive with their code enforcement, in which case, we'll have to file for a temporary restraining order and try to expedite that decision as much as possible. Long term, I don't see how the city can win based on the law in Indiana. But if they were to win, it would be a pretty frightening precedent from a property rights perspective. Essentially, courts would be saying you can use pretextual enforcement of any law, really, to accomplish essentially any objective. And that's really the heart of the equal protection argument that we raised in our preliminary injunction briefing. So everyone understands that when the executive, whether it's an individual police officer or a governor, makes decisions about enforcing the law, they have some discretion about how to do it. They don't need to prosecute everyone as much as possible. The police officer doesn't have to pull over every person who's speeding on the highway. The problem, however, is when enforcement discretion is being used for illegitimate purposes. When they say, the simple example would be, you don't have an equal protection claim if you get pulled over for speeding just because other people who were speeding didn't get pulled over. But they can't pull you over for speeding, because of the color of your skin, for example. They can't pick something illegitimate. Oh, sorry. All right, you still got me? Sorry, my computer paused for a sec. Okay.
Absolutely.
And they can't do it because you choose to exercise your constitutional right not to sell your property, for example. And this is a situation where they've said, we don't typically enforce our code in a draconian manner. We typically only come out and inspect and issue orders to fix things when we have specific notice of a problem. But instead, we're going to go target just those people who have said that they want to stay in this town, just those people that we want to get rid of. They're sending a message out there. It doesn't really matter what you do. We're going to keep coming after you until you get out of here. So that's the essence of the equal protection violation.
And That was something I was very curious about. Is how is this being dealt with in other parts of this town? Are they still are they giving even a token of inspections in the other parts of their municipality there in
Well, we
Charlestown?
don't know everything that's going on in the rest of the town yet. Some of that will come out during discovery. There's no doubt that this inspection activity is entirely focused on Pleasant Ridge. And it's not just the front end inspection activity that they're sending someone out there to go look at these houses. It's what happens after the person gets there. So the city council, the redevelopment commission passed a resolution saying that, no, sorry, not the redevelopment commission. There's so many of these bodies here, I'm getting them mixed up in my head for a second. The Board of Public Works has passed a resolution saying that we're not going to waive any fines unless people effect a, quote, permanent solution, which means tearing down their property or selling it to someone who's going to tear it down. And that's only for this area specifically. Now, the developer, when he buys these properties, he's already acquired about 140 of them, he continues to rent them out. So there are people who are still living here. The developer hasn't had to make any improvements. All of these properties have already been cited for, conditions that are supposedly really dangerous. Yet, once they're in his hands, the city doesn't care whether they're up to code or not. So that's entirely irrational differential treatment, at least from a perspective of health and safety, which is supposed to be the objective of the building maintenance code.
Great explanation so far. Are you hearing any explanation from the city in an official capacity or unofficial capacity? What is the word you're getting back from the city to justify this situation?
Well, we haven't been hearing a lot. There have been a few press releases and Facebook posts, which are not really consistent with the facts on the ground. I don't want to get too far down the road into commenting on what politicians are saying about this. But essentially, no one objects to the city holding properties up to code. What they object to is the pretextual use of this code enforcement. And at bottom, the residents of Pleasant Ridge would love it if all of the landlords were required to maintain their properties well, because not all of them have in the past, and that's one of the reasons that the area has deteriorated. But what they also want is a guarantee that if we take care of our properties and they're up to code, I get to live here as long as I want to. You can't take my house away from me just because I'm not as wealthy as the people you think should live here.
Very interesting. Now, Jeffrey, have you had a chance to spend much time there in Charlestown?
I personally haven't spent a lot. I was down there for our press conference a week ago, and that was my first time. But I drove around it. I've been in a few of the houses and met a lot of the people. They're really fantastic people. And my colleagues have spent a lot of time there. Some of them have been there on and off for years now. So I think...
And that's really what I'm curious about. What is the community opinion? Obviously, they're going to enjoy a fair amount of support in the neighborhood itself. Have you heard much about the larger community in Charlestown and their opinions about this situation?
Well, I'm not aware of any scientific polls about what the rest of the community thinks. I do know that the people of Pleasant Ridge feel that they are not wanted by their neighbors, and that there's at least a strong perception that the people outside of Pleasant Ridge would like this neighborhood to go. And I think that it's very sad. These people have lived together for a long time, and feeling like, here are your children going to the same school as children from down the hill, and yet the parents from down the hill don't think that you should live there anymore. That's a tough situation. I think that, or at least I hope that, as the people of Charlestown think a little bit more about what this really means to the people who live in Pleasant Ridge, that they might reconsider their support for City Council's plans. And in our experience, this actually happens a lot. A lot of people at first blush say, oh yeah, great, new construction, new houses, that sounds good, without taking a second to step back and think about how devastating the consequences are for the victims of this kind of forced redevelopment. But that I think when most people do step back and think about it, they realize just how problematic and frankly immoral it is.
Brings to mind the Alabaster, Alabama case from many years ago. For those of our viewers who want to help, what's the best way that they can support either the Institute for Justice or the homeowners there in Charlestown, Indiana?
I think there are a lot of ways. The obvious way that I have to mention first is that the Institute for Justice can always use donations, and it's very easy to do on the website. These cases are very expensive to litigate, and getting the funds together to do it is a pretty big undertaking. When we litigate cases, we're a public interest firm, so we don't have the resources that large private firms have. But when we choose to litigate a case, we're very careful about vetting it. We do it in a no holds barred, gold-plated manner where, frankly, we litigate as well as any of the biggest New York and DC firms do. But we need to work very hard to raise the money to do that, and we have to be careful about which cases we take in order to be able to give it that kind of attention. Also, this is frankly a political issue, particularly in Indiana, and that's where I hope your viewers can help. I think that, just posting comments on the newspaper articles makes a difference, demonstrating your opposition to this. I think that calling state legislators could make a very big difference here, because municipalities are a creature of the state, and Indiana has demonstrated that it doesn't want this kind of thing to happen. So if there's any sort of larger state attention in Indianapolis, that could go a long way towards, hopefully making the Charleston City Council and mayor reconsider this. So those are some of the obvious things that come to mind.
I think I already know the answer to this, but I'll ask it so you can spell it out as plain as day. How far is the IJ willing to go with this case?
The answer is always the same when we take a case. In litigation, we're willing to go to the Supreme Court. I don't think it'll come to that in this case, because I don't think the law is unsettled enough. I think that, if we were to lose in the trial court, we would definitely win in the appellate court. But yeah, we're absolutely ready to go to the Supreme Court. And if we lose in the Supreme Court, we're willing to go to state houses, which is what we did in Kelo. We fought that case for years and years. It was really a heartbreaking loss in the Supreme Court, and for our client. But in the long run, we generated significant reform in almost every state in the country. And that's how we approach these cases.
Well, the word kilo is a word that lives in infamy when it comes to those of us who advocate property rights, and let's hope that Charlestown does not join it in that category.
Hear, hear.
Well, will you keep us posted? Would you come back in the not-too-distant future and let us know of any changes that come about in this case?
I would be happy to.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Any parting thoughts?
Just to think about the victims of redevelopment. I know I touched on this earlier, but when people talk about redevelopment, they always paint these rosy pictures of, trendy loft apartments and organic gelato and whatever. But redevelopment, when it's done by the government using eminent domain or using this kind of abusive code enforcement, is really about the forced relocation of lower income people. And we've got lots of experience with this. In the 50s and 60s, over 1 million people were displaced from their communities in urban centers in the United States. And normally we call that a refugee crisis. But people, in particular public officials, always want to portray this like they're trying to help these neighborhoods. That's not what's happening. They're trying to level these neighborhoods and build a new one with new residents. And that's frankly immoral.
Absolutely. One of the most frustrating things to explain to people when we talk about the libertarian perspective is how the most fundamental human right is property rights. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks a lot. And,
Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks to Jeffrey Redfern for joining us for this week's Indiana Libertarian Update. Some very great insights and very interesting insights regarding what's happening with property rights down in the southern part of the state. If you would like to be involved, and we know that you guys, being good libertarians, do want to be involved, be sure to like the Charlestown Pleasant Ridge Neighborhood Association page. That's a good clearinghouse for information. Be sure to support the Institute for Justice as well. Be active. Get out there and support these folks. Be sure to know more about the Institute for Justice and what they're up to in the state of Indiana. As we did mention, they are working on at least one other case here in the state, and that is the civil asset forfeiture abuse happening here in the city of Indianapolis. We hope to bring more on that for you in the not-too-distant future. But Indiana Libertarian Update returns next week with Libertarian Party Vice Chair Arvin Vohra. We'll chat with him about the LP, our shared interest in education, as well as what to expect when he joins us for this Indiana State Convention in May. So just again, Arvin will be here for the Libertarian Party of Indiana Convention down in Evansville, and that's coming up in May. But next week, we'll have him right here at the Indiana Libertarian Update. If you have a news story, event, or meeting you want us to pass along, just send us a message via Facebook or drop me an email. It's jsipe@Sipe Society. The Indiana Libertarian Update is a production of SipeSociety.com, your one-man education and online content consultant. Until next time, I'm Jason Sipe, and I'll see you